She was only a servant serving wine at the royal ball, until the Alpha King's wolf chose her in front of everyone. The wolf entered the ballroom at 9:30. Alara saw it before anyone else did. Not because she was watching the doors. She wasn't. She was watching the tray, the way she always watched the tray, calculating the weight distribution of 6 full glasses against the particular angle of her wrist. But because she was standing near the 3rd column, the one closest to the east entrance, and the wolf came through the east entrance, and she was the first thing it saw. It was enormous, black entirely, except for the eyes. The eyes were gray. The very particular gray of overcast sky just before rain. They looked at each other for 1 second across the crowded ballroom. The wolf still, the room moving around it. Alara holding a tray of wine she'd forgotten about. Then the crowd shifted. Someone moved between them, and the moment broke. Alara looked back at her tray. Her hands were steady. She was very careful about her hands. She had been a servant in the Ironwood Palace for 3 years. Before that, she had been the daughter of Lord Edrin of the Ashfield district, a minor noble, which meant enough to matter, and not enough to be remembered, which meant a life that existed in the comfortable middle distance between significance and obscurity. She had grown up in a house with a library and horses, and the particular assumption of a girl raised in minor nobility that the floor beneath her was solid. It hadn't been solid. She'd discovered that 2 winters ago when her father died. Not in battle, not in any way that would have been clean. He died in debt, which is its own kind of quiet catastrophe, the kind that unfolds in documents and sealed letters and the careful, apologetic faces of solicitors who have been dreading this conversation. The house had gone to cover what he owed. The horses had gone. The library had gone, which had hurt more than she'd expected and more than she'd admitted to anyone. Alara had been left with 40 silver coins, her mother's traveling cloak, and the specific, clarifying desperation of someone who has just discovered that everything she thought was solid was built on air. She was not Omega by blood. She was Omega by circumstance. There was a difference, and it mattered, and no one in the palace knew it because no one in the palace had asked. She had learned in 3 years to make herself invisible, not to disappear. Disappearing was dangerous. It meant the work didn't get done, and the work not getting done had consequences. But to exist in a room without occupying it, to move through spaces between people without disturbing the air, to be present and unseen simultaneously. She had made her peace with it. She told herself that often enough that sometimes she believed it. What she did not tell herself, because some things are better left unexamined, was that the invisibility had started to feel less like a skill and more like a sentence. That there were mornings when she stood in the servants' corridor before her shift began and pressed her back against the cold stone wall and thought, "This is not who I am," and then went to work anyway, because 40 silver coins ran out a long time ago, and the cloak, however much she loved it, did not pay rent. The ballroom had been prepared for 3 weeks. Every surface gilded, every chandelier restrung with fresh crystal. The floral arrangements, white roses and winter jasmine in cascades from iron brackets, had cost more than Alara earned in a year, and they filled the air with something so relentlessly beautiful it had started by the 3rd hour to feel faintly oppressive. 12 candidates had arrived over 3 days, princesses, noble daughters, the eldest girls of the great Alpha families, each one more carefully presented than the last, each one carrying the specific energy of women who have been told since birth that this moment is what everything has been building toward. Alara had helped unpack 3 of their trunks. She had not been thanked. She had not expected to be. Princess Sarah of the Northern Territories was considered the favorite. Tall, blonde, luminous, with the kind of beauty that looked effortless because it had taken years to make it look that way. She had arrived with 14 trunks and 2 personal attendants, and the composed certainty of someone who has already decided how this ends. It was the 11th candidate who had stopped Alara in the corridor on the 2nd day. not the most beautiful, not the most strategically positioned, but the only one who had looked at Alara directly, not through her, the way most of them did, but at her, as Alara carried a stack of folded linens past her open door. "That looks heavy," the girl had said. Her name, Alara had learned from the staff list, was Mira. "Are you all right?" Alara had said yes, she was fine, thank you. Mira had nodded and gone back inside. It had taken Alara the rest of the afternoon to work out why it had unsettled her so much. It was the first time in 3 years that anyone in this palace had asked. The ball began at sundown. By the first hour, it had achieved the specific fever pitch of an event where everyone present is performing for everyone else, and the music was loud enough to cover most of it. Alara moved through the crowd with her tray, reading the room the way she always did, calculating routes, adjusting for the slight unevenness in the floor near the third column, the raised tile that had caught 3 servants this year. She was good at this. She was very good at this. She was so good at this that she was already compensating for the raised tile before she registered what had happened. Her foot caught the edge of it anyway. The tray lurched, 3 glasses held. The 4th did not. Wine, deep red, the good vintage, arced through the air in a way that seemed to happen much more slowly than physics required. It landed on the floor, 3 feet from the base of the throne. Alara went completely still. The nearest guests had seen it. She could feel their attention shift, the particular quality of attention that precedes judgment, the moment before a room decides what something means. She crouched to retrieve the glass, head down, making herself as small as possible, calculating how quickly she could clean it, whether this ended in dismissal or merely humiliation. She did not look up, which was why she didn't see the doors open. She heard it. The way a room full of sound goes quiet is different from the way it simply pauses. A pause is temporary. This was the silence of 200 people simultaneously becoming aware of something and choosing, collectively, not to speak. Alara looked up. The wolf entered through the east doors, and the ballroom changed. Not all at once. Not with screaming or retreat, or any of the dramatic responses that stories assign to moments like this. It changed the way a room changes when a storm front moves in from the coast. Gradually, inevitably. The music didn't stop, but it thinned, the musicians losing the thread of it one by one as their attention went where everyone else's attention was going. Toward the doors, toward the thing coming through them. It was bigger than she'd understood from a distance. Alara had seen it from across the ballroom when it entered, had registered enormous, had registered black, had registered those gray eyes finding hers for one unguarded second. But she had not understood the scale of it until the crowd parted and gave her a clear line of sight, and she saw the wolf moving through the space it had just claimed. Its shoulders came to the chest of the men who stepped back to let it pass. Its paws on the marble floor made a sound she felt in her sternum, before she heard it with her ears. A deep, measured rhythm, unhurried. The sound of something that has never needed to announce itself, because its presence was always announcement enough. The chandeliers above it caught the black of its coat and threw it back as something richer. Not flat black, but the black of deep water, the black that contains color if you look at it long enough. Its head swung slowly as it moved, reading the room with the patient thoroughness of something that has all the time in the world and knows it. The crowd finished parting. 200 people, and not one of them made a sound. The wolf moved through the silence it had made of them, and began. Princess Sarah was the first. She stood at the center of the room in pale gold, luminous under the chandeliers, her chin at the precise angle that made the most of her cheekbones. She had been preparing for this her entire life. She looked like she had been preparing for this her entire life, which was both her greatest strength and, in this moment, the thing that made her look slightly less like a person and slightly more like a performance. The wolf walked toward her, 20 feet, 10, 5. It stopped in front of her and lifted its great head and looked at her with those gray eyes from a distance of perhaps 3 feet. Sarah did not move. She was very good at not moving. The wolf was still for a long moment. Then it turned away. 4 steps. 5. Moving on. The smile on Sarah's face held with the specific, practiced control of a woman who has been told since childhood that composure is the highest virtue. It held. Just barely. Lady Voss extended her hand as the wolf approached, bold, deliberate, the gesture of a woman who has decided that meeting power on its own terms is the only way to negotiate with it. The wolf paused. It lowered its head and placed its nose briefly against her palm, then continued past. Voss closed her hand, said nothing. Then Mira. The wolf slowed as it approached her, a change so subtle that Alara wasn't certain she'd seen it until it stopped. And the stopping was different from the other stoppings. Longer, more deliberate. The wolf's head came up and it looked at Mira with an attention that felt less like assessment and more like consideration, like something being weighed carefully rather than simply measured. Mira stood very still. Her hands were clasped in front of her, and her expression was not the practiced composure of the others. It was the raw, barely contained hope of a woman who has wanted something genuinely, without performance, and is watching the moment that will decide it. The wolf looked at her for a long time. The room held its breath. Then it moved on. Mira's expression didn't break. But Alara, watching from near the base of the throne, saw the exact moment it wanted to. She looked away. She didn't know why that hurt as much as it did, but it did. The wolf worked through the remaining candidates with the same unhurried thoroughness, pausing, considering, moving on, each pause raising and then dashing the hopes of the woman who held it. The room's confusion was audible now, low and contained, the sound of 200 people recalibrating their understanding of what was happening. The last candidate. The wolf paused, moved on, and then it stopped. In the middle of the floor, between the candidates and the throne, its great head swung slowly toward the throne, toward the base of the throne, and it stilled, completely. The kind of stillness that animals achieve when they have located exactly what they were looking for. Alara became aware, gradually, and then all at once, that every pair of eyes in the room had followed the wolf's gaze. To her. Crouched on the floor. Cloth in her hand. Wine stain at her knees. The wolf began to walk toward her. She did not move. She could not move. It crossed the distance between them with those measured. Heavy steps, each one landing in the silence the room had made of itself. And she watched it come the way you watch something inevitable. Not with fear, exactly. With the specific held breath recognition of someone who has been waiting for something without knowing they were waiting. It stopped in front of her. Up close it was extraordinary. She was crouched, and it was standing, and even so its head was level with hers, which meant it was not merely large but vast, the kind of large that restructures your understanding of the word. She could see the individual hairs of its coat, each one catching the candlelight at a slightly different angle, the whole of it shifting like black water when it breathed. She could feel the warmth radiating from it, the living warmth of something immense and entirely real, close enough to touch. The gray eyes were looking at her. Not through her. At her. With the specific unhurried attention that she had spent 3 years learning not to expect from anyone in this palace. The ballroom was absolutely silent. 200 people. Not one breath. The wolf held her gaze for a moment that had no measurable length. Then it sat down. The movement was slow and deliberate. Those enormous haunches settling, the great head lowering. And then it pressed its head against her leg. Heavy, warm, completely certain. The contact broke something open in Alara's chest that she hadn't known was sealed. She looked down at the wolf, at those gray eyes looking back up at her from a face the size of her entire torso. Patient and waiting and absolutely sure. Then she looked up at the room. 200 faces, expressions she didn't have names for. Then at the throne. She had been looking at the wolf when the king rose. She'd only looked up now, and he was simply there, standing, the way things are simply there when they've always been there and you haven't been looking. A long moment. Then he said, across the silence of the entire court, "Interesting." Just that. One word. Not surprise, not confusion. The voice of a man who has encountered something he doesn't yet understand, and has decided, in this moment, that understanding it is the most important thing he will do this year. Alara's tray was shaking in her hands. The wolf pressed its head more firmly against her leg. She looked back down at those gray eyes, and thought, very clearly, "What are you?" And underneath that, quieter than anything, "What am I?" They didn't remove her from the ballroom. She had expected removal. The swift, embarrassed erasure of an incident that made no sense. Instead, the head of staff materialized at her elbow and said, "Not you need to leave, but the king requests that you remain." She remained. Standing near the third column, the wolf still at her side. It had not moved, which meant she had not moved, while the court attempted to resume the shape of an evening that had ceased to be normal an hour ago. Princess Sarah left within the hour. She did it with grace. Alara would give her that. Mira left quietly, without looking at anyone. At the door she paused, turned back, looked across the room at Alara with an expression that was not resentment and not anger, but something more complicated than both. The expression of a woman who asked if the linens were heavy, and is now wondering if that small kindness had somehow changed the outcome of an evening she had been preparing for her entire life. Then she was gone. Alara looked at the floor. She had not asked for this. She wanted to be very clear about that. To herself. Because no one else was going to say it. She had not asked for any of it. The king came to her after midnight. Quieter than she'd expected. More deliberate. He stopped in front of her. Up close, he was very tall. Dark-haired. Gray eyes. The same gray as the wolf's. A connection she made now and filed away immediately. "You're the servant who spilled the wine," he said. "Yes, your majesty." "Near the throne." "Yes." He looked at her. Not through her, at her. With the specific attention of someone cataloging something they intend to understand. "What's your name?" he asked. "Alara." He repeated it silently. Then looked at the wolf, then back at her. "He doesn't do that," he said. "I gathered," she said. Something moved in his expression. "You're not frightened of him," he said. "I was, at first. And now?" She looked at the wolf, at those gray eyes looking back at her. "Now I'm more curious than frightened," she said. A pause. "So am I," the king said. And the plain, unperformed honesty of it made her look up at him. A mistake, probably. He was looking at her with an expression that matched his voice exactly. Curious. Genuinely. Completely curious. "Go home," he said. "Get some sleep." She blinked. "Your Majesty? You've had an unusual evening. Go home." A pause. "You'll be reassigned to the East Wing starting tomorrow." Alara looked at him, at the wolf, at him. "Yes, your Majesty," she said. He nodded once, turned and walked back toward the center of the room. The wolf stayed with her for 3 more seconds. Then it rose, pressed its nose briefly against her hand, deliberate, unhurried, the gesture of something that has made a decision, and followed its king. Alara stood near the third column with her empty tray and the ghost of warmth on the back of her hand. and thought very carefully about nothing at all, because if she started thinking about what had just happened, she didn't think she'd be able to stop. She didn't sleep. She lay in her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling and tried, methodically, to find a rational explanation. Wolves were sensitive to scent. Perhaps she'd been near something, an herb, a wood smoke, something from the kitchen, that had triggered a response. Perhaps it was the wine she'd spilled. Perhaps it was simply random. Animals behaved randomly sometimes. She applied the rational explanation carefully, like a bandage over something that wouldn't stop bleeding. It didn't help, because the thing she kept returning to was not the wolf's behavior. It was the king's expression. He hadn't been surprised. She'd been watching his face when the wolf stopped in front of her, and what she'd seen was not surprise. It was recognition, not of her. He hadn't known her before tonight, but of something, as though the wolf's behavior had confirmed something he'd been wondering about for a long time, and he wasn't sure yet whether to be relieved or alarmed. She stared at the ceiling. What did he know that she didn't? And what was she? That a king's wolf would sit at her feet in front of 200 people and look at her like she was the answer to a question nobody had thought to ask. She didn't have answers. She had a reassignment to the East Wing at dawn, and the feeling, faint, sourceless, impossible to explain away, that everything before tonight was prologue, and the actual story was just beginning. She reported to the East Wing at first light. The senior staff member who met her was a woman named Des, compact, efficient, with the expression of someone who has seen many things and formed opinions about most of them, but is not currently sharing those opinions with you. "You're the one from last night," Des said. "Yes," Alara said. Des looked at her with the assessing squint of a woman running a rapid calculation. "Right," she said. "Library corridor, council anteroom, East study. His Majesty uses the East study most mornings. Starting today." She handed Alara a fresh uniform, not the servant gray of last night, a slightly different cut. Still service, still appropriate, but better made. Alara put it on without comment. "One more thing," Des said at the door. Alara turned. "In all my years working this palace," Des said, with the precision of a woman who has decided that a number would be a distraction, "I have never seen that wolf react to anyone the way it reacted to you last night." A pause. "I don't know what that means," she said. "I suspect you don't either." "No," Alara said. "I don't." Des studied her for a long moment. "Then be careful," she said. "Not of the wolf." "Of what, then?" Alara asked. Des looked at her steadily. "Of everything else," she said. She left before Alara could ask what she meant. Alara stood in the corridor for a moment, the better-made uniform folded over her arm. Then she picked up her tray and went to find out. She saw the wolf before she saw the king. It was waiting outside the East study, sitting in the corridor with the patience of something that has been here longer than she has and intends to be here longer still. It looked at her. She looked at it. "Good morning," she said. She wasn't sure why she said it. Force of habit. She said good morning to the kitchen cats, to the horses in the courtyard, to the old gardener who never responded but seemed to appreciate it. It seemed rude not to. The wolf's tail moved. Once. She took that as a response. She set the tray on the side table and reached for the study door. "He's not in yet." She turned. The king was coming down the corridor alone, no guard, in simpler clothing than last night, the clothing of a man who was not performing for anyone at this hour. He looked at her, then at the wolf, then at the space between them. "Were you talking to my wolf?" he asked. "I said good morning," she said. It seemed polite. He looked at the wolf. The wolf looked back at him with the expression of an animal that is absolutely not commenting on this situation. "He's never let anyone do that," the king said. "Talk to him?" "Talk to him like he's simply present. Most people ignore him or treat him like a weapon." A pause. "You talk to him like he was someone." Elara considered this. "Isn't he?" she asked. A silence. Then the king opened the study door. "Come in," he said. "I have questions." The questions were not what she expected. Not about the wolf directly. Not about her bloodline. He asked where she was from, how long she'd worked in the palace, what she thought of the library corridor, and when she gave him an actual answer, detailed and mildly critical of the filing system in the East section, he listened with the specific attention of someone who is genuinely interested and not performing interest. After a while, he set down his cup. "I don't know why he chose you," he said, directly. No preamble. "I want to be clear about that. I have theories, several, but theories aren't answers and I won't pretend otherwise." Elara looked at him. "What are the theories?" she asked. "Not yet," he said. "I'd rather observe first, draw conclusions after." He looked at the wolf, lying on the study floor between them, one eye open, watching. "He knows things I don't, sometimes. I've learned to trust that even when I can't explain it." "And until you can explain it?" she asked. "I'd like you to continue working in the East Wing," he said, "so I can observe." Elara was quiet for a moment. She thought about 3 years of invisible corridors, trunks unpacked without thanks, good mornings said to creatures who couldn't answer. She thought about Mira at the door of the ballroom, looking back across the room with that complicated expression. She thought about Dessa's warning. Not of the wolf. Of everything else. She thought about the wolf pressing its head against her leg. Heavy. Warm. Completely certain. The contact that had broken something open in her chest that she hadn't known was sealed. "All right," she said. "I'll stay." He looked at her. "I have one condition," she said. Something shifted in his expression. The surprise of a man who does not often encounter conditions. "Go on," he said. "When you have an answer," she said. "Not a theory, an answer. Whatever it is, I want to know it." She held his gaze. "Even if it's complicated." He was quiet for a moment. "Especially if it's complicated?" he asked. "Especially then," she said. A long silence. Then he nodded. Once. "Agreed," he said. Outside the study window, the morning was fully light, pale and cold and full of the particular quality of things that haven't happened yet. Elara picked up her tray. The wolf settled its head on its paws, one eye still open, watching. The king looked at his papers. And for the first time in 3 years of invisible corridors and empty trays and good mornings said to creatures who couldn't answer. Someone in the room had agreed to tell her the truth. She didn't know yet what the truth was, but she had a feeling. It was going to change everything she thought she knew about herself. She was, carefully and quietly, willing to find out.